everyone, this is Anaconda Papaya, a very interesting guest of mine, and I'm so happy to see you. And I do have several questions about your life, about your spiritual path. And before we will move to these questions, can you please tell several words about yourself? Who you are, what are you doing, what are
Okay.
your interests in life?
Well, my name is Anaconda Papaya, the animal and plant name. Anaconda is the snake, and papaya is a fruit we all know and many of us love. The reason I have this animal and plant name is because I've been living in a community since about 30 years called Damanhur in northern Italy. And in this community, we all like to play. And one of the games we play, which we call the game of life, involves choosing an animal and a plant name so that we can connect to nature and also because of ecological reasons. I am presently mainly involved in working on a project I've been working on for the last 40 years called the Harmonic Circle. It is a process of personal spiritual growth through group process. And it's about, we call it the Tao of communication, or some places we call it yoga of communication, meaning that we use relationships, which we believe to be the most important part of human life, to progress in our spiritual path. So that's, in a nutshell, my name and what I'm doing now.
And Harmonic Circle is the Damanhurian project.
Not really. The Harmonic Circle is a project I started before getting to know Damaner about 40 years ago.
Mhm.
After I had been a monk for 10 years in the Vaishnava tradition in India and traveling around the world and studying hypnosis, past life regression, neurolinguistic programming, and other transpersonal psychology areas. I came to the understanding that the most important aspect of our lives is relationships as social animals, but also as spiritual beings. We really invest a lot, if not most of our life, in cultivating relationships. So if we bring quality and mindfulness in the quality of our relationships, well, then naturally the quality of our life will improve. This is a project I started before coming to Damaner, but then in time I made it more rich by the learnings I made in Damaner as well. Yeah, I must say that.
You have very unusual life, a lot of periods of your life. I would say not many people go through such experience. Can we start from the childhood? So where you were born and how your childhood went, and did you have any special esoteric abilities when you were a child?
Well, I was born in Florence, Italy, 62 years ago. And when I was 3, my family moved to New York State, about 20 miles from New York City in the country. And then we moved back to Italy when I was 8 years old. And after, when I was 15, I moved to France, where I lived for several years. And I finished my studies prior to becoming a monk in the Vaishnava Bhakti tradition there and in India, and pretty much traveling around the world. So my childhood, what I think was more particular about my childhood that I can remember is that I kind of felt different or awkward, not because I had paranormal powers, but because I was not understanding how was it possible that there is so much suffering in the world? I remember looking at the headlines in newspapers, watching the news on television. There was so much disruption, so much suffering on the planet. And whilst most people around me, my family, my brothers and sisters, didn't seem particularly touched, as if it were normal, what I remember is I was very disturbed by this particular aspect. And so I started wondering, why is this happening? Why is there so much pain on earth? So this was the beginning of a quest for me, which brought me to then very young start to read many spiritual and esoteric books, meet spiritual people, start practicing different forms of yoga when I was very young. I'm speaking when I was like around 10, 12 years old. And so then when I was 18, I could finally do what I wanted without my parents having to approve. They were very supportive, but they didn't like the idea. When I was 14, I wanted to go live in India and go live in a cave somewhere. So anyway, when I was 18, that's pretty much what I did. Not in a cave, but I joined an ashram, yoga ashram, and then I spent 10 years studying and practicing my passion, which was to understand really what are we doing in this kind of three-dimensional reality, and what is the purpose of this game and how to play this game.
So, but why did you become a monk? Because you could develop and study a lot of things, develop your abilities, not becoming a monk. So, what was the reason for that?
Well, many things in our life happen. We bump into them, they bump into us. It may be predestined, it may be something that our soul is chosen prior to being born. There are many possibilities. What I know is that let's say, since I was very early in my life, I was somehow in touch with the Hare Krishna vibration, the Hare Krishna mantra. And I've heard it as early as when I was like 6 years old. In New York State, there was the musical Hair playing in Broadway. And on the radio, I could hear the Hare Krishna mantra. And I remember it always touched me like something that felt familiar. I couldn't explain how or why. But then as I grew older and I traveled, and I always bumped into circumstances which brought me back to this India vibe and to yoga and to the Vedas. So when I was 14 in London, I actually visited an ashram, a Hare Krishna temple in London. And there I was gifted Bhagavad Gita by the monk who showed me around. And this book stayed with me. It meant a lot for me. Although I couldn't read it and understand it, it was too difficult for me. But I felt it was, I used to tell my friends, if I were stranded on a desert island with just one book, that's the book I would have brought with me. And then when I started being able to read that book when I was around 18, I could finally dive deep into the learnings of the Vedas. And that happened in the context of an ashram. And there in the Vedic tradition, the first part of your life is meant to be lived as what is called brahmacharya, which is a celibate life dedicated to study and to service. And then there are further stages in life. And that's grihasta, which is the married phase, and so on. There's 4 stages. So it just came natural to me. I met people who I really admired, who were these monks, who were very knowledgeable and very loving and pure souls. And I wanted to become like them. And so I just followed the path that they had followed to become who they were. That's how I decided kind of to become a monk. It was more of a natural consequence more than a decision per se.
Interesting. What does it mean to be a monk?
Well, to be a monk depends on what traditions. There's so many different ways of being a monk, depending on what lineage and what uh, culture, what tradition. So I can only speak of what pertains my experience. To be a monk in the Hare Krishna tradition has meant for me to be able to go from the book knowledge, from just reading something interesting, to really experience it firsthand. There are some teachings, for those of you who are familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, and maybe perhaps you've heard of the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamoguna. Well, when you're a monk and you live day in and day out the disciplines and the practices of the sadhana bhakti, that is the daily discipline practices that you can live in a ashram context, well, those teachings become something you can actually see, you can experience. It's in Sanskrit, it's tattva darshina. You can actually perceive with your own eyes, with your own heart, with your mind. You can see what's being spoken about and not just philosophically imagine these things. So for me, being a monk has meant going from the theory to the practice and experiencing an amazing amount of, I must say, joy. It was the most joyful, blissful period of my life. Paradoxically, the least external gratification, because there's celibacy, there's abstinence from many intoxicants, you don't drink, you don't eat things. But at the same time, it was the most blissful and ecstatic times of my life.
And 10 years of being a monk in an ashram in India. How did it shape you, your life? What changed?
Well, when I was very young and before I joined the ashram, I was on a quest. I felt there was something missing, but I couldn't exactly tell what. And I was hungry for knowledge, for understanding. And that's what the 10 years of studying the Vedas provided. The Vedas is one of the most ancient narratives of the history of this planet, of this universe, of this reality we are immersed in. And I found the answers I was looking for. I found the knowledge that really shaped my relationship to the divine, both within and without, and in everybody I meet. And what it left me is a sense of deep connectedness. And in some other school, we would call it self-remembrance. That is, I feel that wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, I have experienced such an intimate connection with the divine. And the beauty of that is that it's almost uninterrupted. Almost, because I too, like everybody, I believe, have my ups and downs. But the downs don't last long. And as soon as I feel I'm out of focus, I'm out of balance with myself, I'm not centered or in contact with my heart, then I feel it clearly and quickly enough to rapidly reconnect. And that's the gift I've received from the practices for 10 years. Yeah.
Why did you decide that it's time to move further? What happened? Why you stopped being a monk and moved?
Well, my experience within the Hare Krishna temple has brought me to a point where I was questioning the quality of my spiritual path within the context of an institution, like a religious institution. And I was observing some dynamics which I felt were not in alignment. Let's say the politics, the typical politics that happen within any human institution, which are kind of something you can't really do without. And but our human nature tends to show off more easily in those kind of dynamics, and I was just kind of not in attunement with those hierarchical dynamics and the ways it played out. So I went to India for 6 months. I traveled and I was praying and connecting and meditating what I would have wanted to do for the next time of my life. And I wasn't clear for some months. So one day I sat in a temple in a place called Mangalagiri, in a Nrsingadev temple. I sat and I said, I'm not getting up until I know exactly what I'm going to do in the next years of my life, next phase of my life. So it took me 4 hours, but after that I was very clear I was going to go back to my one of my hometowns in Milano, Italy. I was going to open a yoga studio where my purpose was to make spiritual life available to common men, not necessarily the deepest bhakti, the most intimate and difficult areas to reach, but more day-to-day spiritual life. So I imagined exactly how I wanted it to be, where I wanted people to come to my house because I'm lazy. I don't like to commute to go to work. So I wanted people to come to my place. And I also wanted to have a practice in past life regression therapy because I was starting off on that path and I was really fascinated by what I was finding out. I had just learned to practice hypnosis on people and have people go back in their past lives. And I was extremely fascinated by the amount of incredible information, hands on information of people's actual histories of their souls throughout centuries and planets and everything. And that was for me the next step after the Vedas, which describes everything from a, let's say, still book point of view. Well, doing past life regression and in between lives for people, and also contacting people's higher selves and having clear communication with them was my next step in understanding spiritual life. So I had planned that I would have opened this place to teach yoga, teach meditation, hypnosis, and practice courses of past life regression. So 2 years after, all that I had imagined in that session in the temple had actually manifested exactly how I had imagined and even more. Meanwhile, in between, I had traveled the world and I had taken certifications in clinical and Ericksonian hypnotherapy, neurolinguistic programming, and past life regression research, yoga, Shivananda yoga training, because in Bhakti yoga it was more focused just on the divine, whereas I also wanted the body to be involved. I wanted my center to be more holistic. So in this place I opened in Milano 2 years after, we did everything from physical yoga to devotional yogas and mantras and prayer, hypnosis, and everything in between.
Very interesting. And how from Milano you ended up in Piedmont, in
How did
Damanhur?
I end up in Damodaran? That's a good question. Well, what happened is this. I used to do lots of hypnosis sessions. And while I was doing hypnosis with people, I would also have many intuitions and communications with my own higher self. And I was being guided to use, to learn to use only presence and energy and laying of hands and not words, not speech in the healing process. So it was strange at first. I didn't quite understand, but more and more it became clear that I was being guided, invited to search out for spiritual healing teachers. So I did that. I set off on a journey. I remember I traveled a lot. I went to south of France. I met many Christian spiritual healers who would just do laying of hands from Christ traditions, Christic traditions. But then after 1 year, I didn't really get anywhere. I had a lot of information, but I had no hands-on experience. So what I did one night, I remember I was doing my journaling in the evening. I wrote to myself, I said, tomorrow I'm going to look for a teacher. Well, interestingly, the morning after, one of my yoga students left a newspaper. And I didn't used to read newspapers then because I was very, mystical. I didn't care about the worldly things. But for some reason, I was flipping the pages of this newspaper, and this picture appeared of these people dressed in white, a picture taken from a helicopter, all this group of people in a big field. And it felt, my heart started pounding. It felt so familiar. It was like strong deja vu. I felt, what is this? And I read on the side, and it said, School for Spiritual Healers. This was a daily newspaper. It wasn't just like a spiritual review. And that was the only time in history Damoner had ever published anything like that. There's a whole story behind that too, but I won't go there now. It's too long. But interesting, that's how I learned about the existence of Damoner. And so I phoned and I went to the meeting in Turin the week after, and there was Falco was there, the founder of Damoner. I did not know it was him or the founder. I just saw this person talking, and I was amazed by the amount of knowledge they had, and the quality of the knowledge they had about spiritual healing and everything. So I ended up joining the school, the 3-year long spiritual healing school, which I attended monthly and during the summers. And then I fell in love with Orango, the teacher of this school, and with Gazzella, who is still now my best friend, who was one of the teachers of that school. And eventually I just moved into Damoner. I spent more and more time in Damoner than I did in Milano over 2 or 3 years. Then I eventually joined Damoner and went to Milano to do my work. That's before I actually started working full time in Damoner as a teacher for children.
We have so many things in common,
Ah,
starting with this passion for past life regressions. When your eyes are burning when you talk about it, I share the same. And when you started to talk about Orango,
everyone loves Orango.
yes, I do not know Italian, so I cannot communicate with
Oh,
him,
he
but
doesn't
we,
need
we
the language.
communicate with heart to heart.
Yes.
And for me, it's also a very special person. Um, as far as we touched Falco,
Mm.
how many years you were in Damanhur when he was here? Falco already ended his incarnation.
Mm. Well, Falco died about 11 years ago,
Mhm.
and I had been in Damoner for about 20 years already. And yeah, so for about 20 years, I've known Falco, interacted with him. And what's your question exactly?
So what role did he play in your life?
Oh, what
How
role did he play in
important
my life?
how important it was for you to meet him?
Well, I think Falco has been one of my most meaningful encounters in this life. One of the ways, well, first of all, his having seeded such an amazing reality like Damanhur. Damanhur is on the planet nowadays is probably one of the most developed social spiritual communities. Um, it's amazing from so many points of view, and its creation of the underground temples of humankind. He is the person who was inspiring all this. So I was involved and happily participated and benefited from this. I was going to say life changing, but this is many lives changing experience, because this happening now is really the completion of, I think, many incarnations of preparation, what we've done here now. And he has been the person inspiring all this. So I see him as a crucial role in having given me the possibility to connect my little piece to the bigger piece that Damoner represents in the world. Actually, as I'm saying this, I remember that before joining Damoner, I was pretty content. had my yoga studio. I had my group of students. I was doing fairly well. I never felt I was working really. I was just following my passion. I was having fun. I started the harmonic circle back then, the concepts that I'm still working on now. And I was pretty happy if it weren't for the fact that some of my students in the harmonic circle were lamenting how they had children, and when they brought their children to school, to a normal school, they were lamenting that the teachers were not conscious people. Teachers were people who were basically ignorant of the basic spiritual facts of life. So they were sad that they didn't have a choice of a greater society that could actually host spiritual awareness in all of its cycles of its life, from birth to childhood, education, and so on. And so when I was that was when I was doing the spiritual healing school, and I remember once Falco being quoted by Orango. Orango said that Falco had explained how there's no such a thing as individual enlightenment. I was coming from the Hindu yogic tradition where it's all about, ending samsara, going back to Godhead, and so on. And then I was not familiar then yet with the concept of collective embodiment of divine consciousness. And so Falco was teaching about the concept that in order to really bring forward our spiritual awareness, we need to be a people. We cannot just be individuals. We need to be a people who can actually reproduce and bring spiritual knowledge to our children so they can remember when they are small, they can remember who they are, where they're coming from, what they're here for. Because less and less, now more and more amazing people are being born since the last 20 years, thanks to the work that many groups, such as Damanar, have done on the planet. Meanwhile, many higher conscious beings are taking birth. But at the time, it wasn't like that. It was very difficult to have an environment that would help. So that's what Falco made possible: a community, a social environment where people who are like-minded could unite their strength and build a real alternative to the mainstream society. So that's what Falco represented for me: someone who was a genius enough, spiritually speaking, to actually create a viable alternative for living socially and spiritually in this day and age.
So in India, there is a term avatar for divine incarnations. And everything I know about Falco from people who knew him in person, from the books about Falco or books he wrote himself about him in Damanhur, he had very special abilities. So do you think that Falco was an avatar?
Of course, I mean, strictly speaking, I believe, to be honest, that we are all avatars. We are all avatars. This is my personal point of view, because each one of us is only a partial representation of who we truly are on a higher dimensional plane. So, in that sense, strictly, we are all avatars. On the other hand, what you mean is the classic sense of there being masters, teachers. So, for sure, Falco is not an ordinary human being. He carried so much knowledge and so much power and so many paranormal abilities. But I would not like to focalize on that, because what I really liked about Falco is actually the opposite. And I once told him, I actually gifted him a book, a beautiful book about stars, and I wrote him in the first page, I wrote how what I really loved about him, and that was the most inspiring thing about him and for me, was that unlike many masters and teachers who dress special and they they go in special cars, or they have external signs of their being special. They need those somehow. Well, what I really liked about Falco was that he was extremely casual and extremely ordinary in a sense, yet he was at the same time the most extraordinary human being I ever met from a spiritual, magical, esoteric point of view, and also the use of power, but always in a very invisible way, because his purpose was never to show off or to demonstrate anything. His purpose was not, in his own words, to be our master. He didn't like to be called master, even though many Damanhurians still call him that way. He explained his purpose to be to awaken our own inner master. So that is his teaching, that is his path. And that's what I personally resonate the most with. And I would like to add that I believe we are moving out of the age where we need gurus and teachers and masters. I believe that we are moving into an age, the age of Aquarius, where more and more there will be groups, clusters of awakened beings together. For example, there's this famous spiritual teacher called Krishnamurti. Many people heard of Krishnamurti. Well, he was asked at some point in an interview, he was asked if he believed, no, he was asked if Buddha were to reincarnate in the 21st century, what shape or form would he have taken? What would he have looked like? Where would he have been born? And so Krishnamurti thought about it a while, and then he said this. He said, well, if Buddha were to reincarnate in the 21st century, I believe he would reincarnate in the form of a community.
Oh, this is such a beautiful answer.
And this is what the harmonic circle is all about. It's about going beyond our individuality and reckoning that you and I are different bodies. Our skin separates us, but we know on another level we are one. We're all connected, and we are all part of the same divine being. And yet this human experience is apparently so separative. And my belief, my personal point of view, is that this is the very point of human incarnation, is to experience learning unity through the challenge and the appearance of separation. Because otherwise, what would we be doing here in these guises? Given that anybody who does enough meditation, or even people doing like ayahuasca or extrasensory, but something that all mystics from all ages, all cultures, Christian mystics, Sufi mystics, Buddhists, everyone agrees that when you take away the veil of Maya, what we discover is that we are all one. So if that's the case, then why are we experiencing incarnation? And my belief is that the challenge now is to enlighten, but unlike the many lives we've done it already, is to do this for the first time maybe together. And that's the challenge, and that's why community can be so important. Or for sure, relationships are the path. For example, it doesn't make any sense a person to be meditating and doing their mantra and being spiritual and then fighting with everyone around them, or even within themselves. So I believe the real point is to learn to harmonize my relationship with myself, with my various parts, and then as below, so above, to harmonize my relationship with humans around me in my life. I believe that is the privileged path of enlightenment in this day and age. But this is my point of view, of course.
Okay. So if you would describe Damanhur with like several phrases or several words, what would you say?
Damanhur. Well, Damanhur is, it's hard to summarize because it's so many things at the same time. On the more simple external level, it's a spiritual society. It's a federation of communities. Physically speaking, it's about 30 groups. It's located at several miles one from the other. Some in living in houses or in farms or in different types of habitats, more natural, more rural, or in the city. And they all, groups of maybe 8 to 15, 20 people living together, sharing the spaces of the house, like the kitchen, the living room, the gardens, and everything, but everyone having their own room um, and private spaces. And these are intentional communities. There's about 30 of them in Damaner, and that's the social aspect of Damaner. There is a more esoteric aspect about Damaner, in that Damaner is actually founded on a mystery school. It's based on spiritual knowledge, on an esoteric tradition that is been going on for millennia, and it's just the the form it takes in this time, in this age, is this spiritual physical community, but the teaching that is being carried by Damaner is really uh, it's timeless, and it's condensed and expressed in one of the main works of art. Art is very important in Damaner, but there's one work of art and architecture that is outstanding. It's called the Temples of Humanity. It's a hand dug cathedral with many, many different halls. It's huge, and it's like a 10-story building down inside a mountain. You can see this online. It's easier because I could talk about it, but one picture will be more than 1,000 words. If you look up the temples of humankind.org or Damanhur, DAMANHUR.org, you're going to find so much information. And there are thousands of people who come to visit Damanhur every year. There's many spiritual groups who come and they do their meditations within the halls of the temples of humankind. The temples of humankind are a non-religious spiritual temple that hosts and celebrates all the spiritual paths of humankind throughout history. So this is what I can say in a nutshell, because people who come to visit Damaner, after 10 days that they've been here, they feel they just started to look at the tip of the iceberg of the community. So if you come to visit Damaner, I suggest you plan at least a couple of weeks if you want to get a sense. Of course, you can come for shorter visits, but it is to really know about Damaner, it takes time.
Can you please compare your experience of living in the religious ashram, also spiritual community in India, and non-religious and very spiritual community as Damanhur?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, there is a great difference. The main difference that I would say I felt is that in the religious ashram of the Hare Krishna society, then I don't know what it's like now. Maybe it changed, but then there was a very rigid hierarchical society and structure of the elders, and those who were ahead on the path were pretty much in control of what happened. What struck me positively about Damaner when I met Damaner is that it didn't matter who you were. If you had a good idea, that was adopted and applied by the whole society. There was no distinction, no formal distinction based on how old you have been in the community or things like that. It was more informal. It was more authentic in that sense. Less mystical. I still like and love the mystical feeling of the Hare Krishna environment, and it's still part of my life in that sense. But I also very much like the non dogmatic and very pragmatic and down to earth and very open minded philosophy of the Dominarian view.
Can you please tell which roles you had in Damanhur over the years?
Sure. I had many roles in Dominar. In Dominar, when I began, I joined Dominar. I was asked to help manage the university for a year or two. With Gazzella, I was managing the university. It was called the Libera Università, the Free University of Dominar. And then after that, I was asked to help by Falco to help in school to teach in children. So I joined the staff of the teachers, and at that stage we revolutionized the whole method of teaching, and we created a very original model that took the best of the several models that are known around the world. Waldorf, we had some inspiration from Waldorf, some from other models, but mainly we created our own system that was based on small groups and having not teachers moving around all the time, but one main teacher for every group. The groups were of like 6, 8, 10 children and divided different ages, mixed ages. So we'd had 2 or sometimes 3 different aged groups of children. And then that was the setting. And together with that, the learning model was experiential. It was more about doing and also traveling to go to experience those things that children were curious to know about. And then we had to turn all that also into academic preparedness because we were giving exams in the Italian government system. So we needed, rightly so, the children to be prepared every year to have all the maths and the literature, the Italian language, history, geography. So it was challenging, but it was extremely one of the best times in my life. We traveled around Europe and around the world with children, different ages, and they've been memorable experiences that now they're grown-ups, and we still remember fondly when we meet about those times when we were traveling. I worked in the educational system in Daman for about 18 years. After that, I worked in the company that has created the Music of the Plants device. It's an electronic device that allows plants to sing, to play music. You can find that online, musicoftheplants.org or .com.
That's amazing. I love it.
It's an incredible thing. If you're a plant lover, you definitely have to look into it. And then after that, I was asked to help manage Dominar and consult and assist and coach different roles of managers there, basically teaching the adults, and in particular about communication. That's because Falco, after passing, he left he calls them gifts, but he left many Dominarians some special personal assignments. So the gift he left me was the request to teach what I knew about hypnosis and communication to all of his initiate students, all the members of his communities worldwide, because he said in his absence, communication would have been more and more important among all the members of the community. And if it worsened, he said it would disperse the community itself. If it would improve, it would help and save the community. So I've been spending quite some time trying to pass on to all the members of the community, both in Italy and worldwide, sharing the basic tenets of spiritual communication concepts, both internal communication, interpersonal, and in group dynamics. And which is actually part of the harmonic circle, because the harmonic circle really takes this basic knowledge and develops it further into a spiritual path of inner growth. So that's what I've been doing, and I've been spending 3 years as a king guide of Damanhur. King guide is the name that was given to the top administrators, and we were four. This was until COVID, and we were four with different areas. One was focused on economic development, the other one on finances, the other one on social development, and I was in charge of international relations and development. So that's a time where I traveled the world, helping grow and establish local Damanhurian communities in the east, in the west, in north, south. There's thousands of Damanhurians worldwide who are trying to bring the teachings of Damanhur and ground them in their own reality. And that's what I was traveling to help make happen. And also teaching these basic teachings about community development, community building, and healthy relationships between people. Because the greatest challenge to create a successful community is, at the end of the day, really seems to be the quality of relationships and trust that can be developed. And so that's what I was trying to share, because that was also what Falco in the gift has asked me to share. So this still now is my main role, is to pursue this mission of spreading around the world, not only in Damanhur, these basic teachings of spiritual communication. That's it.
Mhm.
You wanted to know what's the most difficult experience I had in Damanhur.
Before we step in, I wanted to say that there are very many tasks that the Manchurians carry out, the same as other people that live the normal standard life. But on the top of those, there are very special tasks. And there are groups that are making researches, or they have special missions, and so on. And I'm wondering if you had such experience. The Mahur pretty openly tells about deep connection to Egypt civilization, to Atlantis civilization and connections. And probably there are many other civilizations. And did you take parts in such interesting, unusual things? And did you experience teleportation? Did you experience something very unusual that many people think even
Paranormal.
Yes. Can you share something like this?
This is a big subject on its own, and as I said before, like Falco was not into making paranormal powers the point of our spiritual path. They are more considered like side effects or side dishes of the main point, which is to be served in service of creating an alternative plane here. Now, the whole point of Damanhur's existence is to create a new timeline. From an esoteric point of view, there are many ways to look at our reality and define our reality, and therefore what is our place in this game. And it is a very broad topic. What I can say is, yes, I have participated, but I believe every Damanhurian who has been here long enough and during Falco's life has participated in many more esoteric or paranormal kinds of work involving the awareness of our star origin, the fact that we actually originate we are all star seeds in one way or another. Civilizations have been present on this earth way before what our traditional history is describing. And all a learning to remember your past lives in relation to the project we are in now, and recollecting the pieces of your past lives that have built up to your missions in this life. All these are normal part of what is called in Damanar the path of medit action. As I said, Damanar is a mystery school, first and foremost. And within this mystery school, which is not a weekend course, it's a lifetime investment, you explore all these topics, depending on what your personal calling is for, or your interest, or your passions. But we all come in touch with, we all experience this, which seems paranormal, but for us is not paranormal. It's just another way of being normal. And but to it's not something we like to talk about because it's easily, it can be made into a sensational thing. We are more about experiencing thing than talking about it. So I wouldn't go too deep in that because I don't think it serves any use, real use.
So for the school, you just mentioned mediation.
Meditation.
Medit
If
action.
anyone's interested, they can write to Damanar and ask, and there's presentations, there's ways to find out if that could be potentially your path. If you're listening to this and you feel a calling to know more about what is Dhamana really about and what are all the inner teachings, you could start studying the website and then write and find out where and when are introductory courses to the meditation school happening. Yeah.
So, what's the most challenging task of the Daman for life?
Well, the most challenging for me has been being a king guide, being one of the top managers of Damanar in a time such as COVID, when there was the COVID um, pandemic event. Those were very challenging times because we had to manage the whole community with the. You see, Damanar is not it's not a militaristic institution where everyone has to think things the same way, or someone tells people what the truth is and therefore how to go about things. People have different points of view, from the more traditional to the more alternative. But when you have the responsibility of managing people's security, everybody's health, and things like that, it can be pretty intense to handle all that cross-firing, different points of view, and life-threatening circumstances. So I must say those have been very intense and stressful times, and that's probably the biggest challenge I have had, or the more difficult time. Not just for Dominar, but also those days I was traveling around the world and it was very complicated to travel. It was very difficult because of all the blockages and the vaccines and everything. So I remember that as a difficult and challenging time.
Thank you for sharing. How do you perceive the structure of divine forces now, and the structure of universe, and what is universe, what is divine? Is there one God that created everything, whatever it's called, creator God, something else? What's your current view? How divine is structured?
Well, to put all that simple question into a nutshell answer, I would say that my current view is pretty much what the Vedas describe in some way, with some language, what Falco describes in the teachings of spiritual physics, that this universe is a spiritual ecosystem. We are used to witnessing a physical, biological ecosystem on Earth that goes from bacteria to superior animals. The same thing happens on the spiritual level. As above, so below. As within, so without. So this universal hermetic law pretty much wraps up the fact that everything we experience and witness on this plane of reality is also reflected on higher planes in a fractal mode. So if there's one God or many gods, I would propose a crazy answer is there's both, just one God and both many gods. Why? Because this question is based on a dualistic three-dimensional perspective where things are either one or the other. But in spiritual reality, it is not like that. In spiritual dimensions, math, there's a special math. So let's see, Rumi, the Persian mystic of the 1400s, the way he put it, he said, it is not only that each one of us, living soul, is one drop of the ocean, but we are the whole ocean in a single drop. So each one of us is a fractal of the whole of God, and yet only a parcel of God. So in the Vedas, this is described as achintya, which means inconceivable. Achintya, Beda, Abeda, one, and Abeda, differentiated tattva. The universal truth of reality being both one and differentiated at the same time. So this is my personal way of seeing things and believing about life. There's from the spiritual, there's another beautiful verse from the Vedas, from one of the Upanishads called Sri Ishupanishad, that says, Om Purnamada Purnam Idam Purnat Purnam Udachate Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. And this verse illustrates this fractal nature of God and the universes. And it says how God is one and like distinguished, one and unique. At the same time, it splits itself, it divides itself in all the multitude of beings and universes and planets and atoms that exist. Yet he remains one and separate, and at the same time, he is complete in each one of his manifestations. So our brain cannot wrap up this concept because it is not something we can experience in the physical reality, but this is spiritual mathematics. And so this is the way I think it is. I think it doesn't really matter to understand everything with our brain alone because we will not wrap it up. What's most important is to feel the truth of God in our heart. And what does that mean? I believe the point of all this is to understand why are we here, the meaning of things. I think the essence of spirituality is not so much understanding the technicalities as much as understanding the meaning. Spirituality is hidden in the meaning of life. So I think everyone should pursue understanding for themselves, why am I here? And we have the answers inside. And if you ask yourself long enough, patiently enough, if you really mean it, you will find your answers. So it's not about understanding the technicalities of the esoteric or paranormal. It's more about listening to your heart and understanding what is your part in making your life better and the life of those around you, because that is your mission. This is my point of view, of course. I may be wrong, but this is where I came to understand so far.
Thank you for sharing. So you have so many instruments. You studied a lot, and you probably, the question I want to ask, you probably have many different ways to do that. But for people who do not have such instruments, that are just starting to look at this path, so other simple things that every person can do to connect with higher self, to connect with divine, to connect with universe in a healthy, harmonic, and safe way.
Well, yeah, I believe the first thing is desire, to want to do what you're saying. The first step is to actually want it. Once a person really wants it, then they have to make some choices. They have to make a decision. And that decision is to dedicate a little time every day. This is my advice. Take some time to have a romantic date, an appointment with the most important person in your life. That's something most of us don't do. And who is the most important person in your life? Is it your mother, your father, your children, your lovers? No, it's you. So, my heartfelt advice, if you really want to make spiritual progress and feel good and increasingly better in your life in basically zero time, all you need to do is set aside some time, some quality time to just be with yourself. I think 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day is enough if done consistently. And in those 10, 20, 30 minutes, well, do whatever you like doing that connects you, that represents a little step forward in cultivating this relationship, this intimacy. So listen to yourself, feel your body. If you're a body person, you can do some yoga, some stretching, some breathing, some very simple 5 minutes of contacting your physical temple. Then dedicate 5 minutes to cultivating your energy body. So breathing consciously, contacting nature, and then study, read something that is not narrow-minded but expansive in nature. There's many beautiful books out there. Nowadays there's beautiful YouTube teachings, like with teachers like Eckhart Tolle or Wayne Dyer, or many teachers who teach spirituality in a very broad and open way. Alan Watts is another very good one I recommend. And so study, read, infuse your mind. So we started with the body, then the energy body, your breathing, then reading. And if you like, you can do some mindfulness practice. There's many simple meditation techniques. The simplest, the better. Just like even sitting there, breathing, being present. Um, this is what I recommend you do if you want to start this journey. And once you do that, it's a little bit like dialing a phone number for your higher self. And once you start ringing that phone, the answer will come. Your higher self will pick up the phone and it will guide you from within to meet the right people, the right book, the right next step in your path. There's a saying in the Bible, it says, those who knock, they will get an answer. This is a universal truth about spiritual life. No question, no prayer goes unheard. And then last thing I would say, at night, before going to sleep, think back at your day. Journaling is a very good practice as well, writing down a few things about what you understand about yourself every day. And think about what you learned today. And that way you start afresh the day after, and you will be building self knowledge, self understanding, and so on and so forth.
And just very fast questions. Favorite quote?
Sorry?
Favorite quote?
My favorite what?
Quote.
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 Quote. Okay. My favorite quote is, I have many favorite quotes, but
Okay, top
the
three.
one, the toppest of all is this. It goes like this. It says that life is a long lesson in humility.
Mm.
In other words, humility, in the real sense of the word, is the highest perfection that I believe we can pursue, achieve, and cultivate. Now, humility is often thought of like diminishing oneself. That's a very Catholic idea in Italy at least, that you have to beat yourself up and feel inferior. No, humility, in my mind, but also in the Vedas, it's equivalent of intelligence. Spiritual intelligence means reminding yourself that you don't know. You know that you don't know, and therefore you don't assume. Therefore, you are humbly curious, open, and you have an inquisitive mind. You don't draw conclusions, or you don't express judgments about people and even about yourself. That's the top lesson of life. Therefore, the quote says, life is a long lesson in humility. Because the more you know, the more you discover, the more you know that you don't know. That's my point of view.
What is your favorite book?
I have many favorite books, but one of my favorite books is the Bhagavad Gita. Another favorite book of mine is the Book of Mirdad, the Book of Mirdad by Michael Naimi. There's beautiful books by Gibran, and the list would go on and on.
What's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is a movie that not many people have seen. It's a French movie called La Petite Verte, the small green. In Italian, it's called Pianeta Verde, Green Planet. It's a science fiction slash comical slash ecological movie. The director of this movie is called Colline Serrault. She's French, and she's also the actor in the movie, and also she plays the music of the soundtrack of the movie, just like Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin, he directed his movies, he played in his movies, he was the main actor, and he made the music of his movies. Did you know that? And so Colline Serrault, she's an amazing, I believe, enlightened being. And she made this movie, which is super humoristic. Children love it, but it's one of the most profound spiritual movies I've ever seen in my life.
I got so much
You know this
interested.
movie?
No,
Oh,
but now I will look for
it's
it.
fantastic.
Um, so you told us that you're working for Harmonic Circle. Are there any other things you're doing with people?
Well, I have a private practice. I do coaching, I do hypnosis, I do holistic coaching, which is more a one on one application of the teachings of the harmonic circle. Some people cannot manage to follow the course on a regular basis, so they prefer to have a one on one, more flexible structure. And I do the same basically. I walk people through a path of self awakening, through cultivating their relationship with themselves, with others, with the different groups and circles they're involved in their life, and basically using the same tools, the same teachings, or sometimes it's tailored at whatever other specific need people may have, such as professional development or personal and so on. That's the coaching part, holistic coaching. Then I do hypnosis. I do I call it spiritual hypnosis because I did study as a clinical hypnotherapist in the States, but I'm not interested in the clinical applications. Plus, in Europe, to do that, you need to be a doctor or a psychotherapist, which I am not. But mostly, I'm not interested in that application. I'm interested in using hypnosis as a tool for spiritual awakening. And therefore, I call it spiritual hypnosis, because whatever the type of work we do, I always call upon a person's higher guides in order for them to guide the applications of hypnosis within a person's life. And that's what I do one-on-one mainly. Then, other than that, I teach courses. I created an academy called Harmonic Circle Academy.org, which you can find online. And the Harmonic Circle is the main format that we are, let's say, applying worldwide in several groups around the world in many languages. Like we've had circles in Italian, English, Russian, French, Japanese, and so on and so forth, Spanish. So we are trying to create a worldwide community of people who speak the same language about the quality of communication and building network of friends. The idea is that friendship, we believe, is the highest form of love, because it has the less strings attached. It's the more spontaneous and authentic way to be with each other, which can apply to relationships, by the way.
Mm-hmm. I really like this term spiritual hypnosis, because for me, past life regression is so narrow. This is so narrow. For some people, this is what they can do, but for others, it's completely new world, and it's not descriptive. So the spiritual hypnosis opens up a lot of opportunities. And the very last question for today. So if the whole humanity is right in front of you and listens to you, is able to understand clearly, hear, and acknowledge, what would you say?
Well, if I had a chance to speak to all of humanity, I would invite everybody to inquire and question. Simply remember that we don't know anything really. My invitation would be to not take anything for granted anymore, because taking each other for granted, taking our life for granted, taking our physical body for granted, the planet, the stars, the universe is specifically that form of ignorance that causes all the suffering in this planet. It is the lack of awareness and higher consciousness. So living consciously means remembering, for example, that we're here to die. And that, what does that mean? In this human game, no one comes out alive. So that's something people would prefer to ignore. But when we remember that we only have a limited time here, and we don't know, no one knows how long they have more to live, well, that is very humbling, and that awakens a lot of intelligence, saying, wait a moment, if I'm here today in this physical form and I may not be here tomorrow, what really matters in my interaction with the person I live with the people I meet in the street, with my own relationship with myself? What is the most important thing that I would like to be doing today, knowing and remembering this might be the last day of my life? Think of it that way and see what happens to you.
Anaconda Papaya, that was so interesting. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot today about you and about the universe, and I'm very grateful, and it was very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.